What's going on, everybody? Today I want to share with you how I photographed and documented my climb up the second tallest mountain in Ecuador. On February 13th, 2022, my buddy Hayden and I climbed Cotopaxi Volcano, which is the third tallest active volcano in the world and the second tallest mountain in Ecuador. It was one of the craziest things I've ever done. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. We made an entire film about the journey, the expedition, leading up to it, when I got food poisoning, and the climb itself, and that film is on my channel. But today I want to break down the technical side of this and how I shot this as a photographer and filmmaker. So in this video I want to talk about the trip itself, the gear I used while we were down in Ecuador, and then the gear I used on the climb itself, all of the kind of conditions that we encountered with the weather, why every single ounce of weight in the backpack mattered, and then I want to break down with you guys some of my favorite photographs from the climb itself and what I would change if I was to do this again as far as the gear goes. So to give you guys some background on this, in case you're new to the channel or in case you didn't see the Cotopaxi film, Cotopaxi is an active glaciated volcano, which means the volcano is active, but the entire upper few thousand feet of the volcano are covered in glaciers and crevasses. So Cotopaxi is 19,347 feet tall. It's the highest I've ever been in my life. It's the hardest mountain I've ever climbed, but at the same time, it was an amazing culmination of what I do as a photographer and a creator. It was bringing my love of the outdoors, mountains, rock climbing, and hiking with my love of creating, and I got to bring this all together through the Cotopaxi film and sharing this breakdown with you guys. So if you're not a hiker or a climber or you don't know much about Cotopaxi, for me there was a very tough physical endeavor as well as a huge mental challenge, aside from getting food poisoning right before our climb and my entire body being way weaker than normal. But for photographing this, it kind of just brings in a whole other realm of elements to making this happen. Part of what I love about traveling and being outside and climbing and things like that is sharing it and creating photographs and things like this. So I knew that when I committed to doing Cotopaxi with Hayden, that there was no question. I was bringing my cameras, I was bringing all my gear. I didn't care how much extra I had to train. I was going there with the intent of coming back with lifelong photos that I'll cherish forever. So to start with the breakdown of the gear, I'm going to talk about what I took for the trip itself, and then I'll go into what I took on the climb. So I took my Sony a7 III camera body, my Sony a7R III camera body, my 20mm 1.8 prime lens, my 85mm 1.8 prime lens, my 24-70 f4 lens. I brought my DJI Mavic Air 2S with a few batteries and the controller, obviously, GoPro Hero 8 and Insta360, and my tripod for time lapses. So I had all my bases covered. Typically when I'm traveling with my girlfriend Bree, as you'd see in other videos, she shoots Sony as well, and she has a 1635 G Master and a 7200 G Master. So typically we kind of just go all in and share the lenses, but I knew my equipment was gonna take a beating on this trip, so I wasn't even gonna bother asking her to borrow that stuff because I didn't want anything to happen to it. So I went with my three main lenses. And in the week leading up to the trip, Hayden and I climbed a smaller volcano. We explored downtown Quito and kind of just got lost in the city, shooting and using all of this gear and trying to document everything the best we could and really showcase how beautiful of a country this is. And then for the climb itself, so the entire journey to do Cotopaxi was 3 days. It can be 2 days, but we added a night prior in a place called Tambopaxi Lodge. You head up to Cotopaxi on the next day. So you sleep at Tambopaxi, which is around 12,900 feet in elevation. And then the next morning you head up to 15,200, which is the limit of how far cars can drive up Cotopaxi, which is a pretty gnarly road in itself. And then once you park, you actually have to hike up to your next refugio where you're gonna be sleeping that night. And that's only about half a mile, but it's almost 1,000 feet in elevation gain. And you're carrying all your camera gear, all your climbing gear, your sleeping bag, because you need it for the refugio that night, food, water, and we didn't know if there was gonna be toilet paper up there. We didn't know what to expect, so we carried everything, and this part was brutal. And we actually did it in the hail and in the snow and in the rain, so all of our stuff got soaked. And while we did film a bunch of it, we were also trying not to destroy our gear before the climb. So Once we got in, we settled our things. We dropped all the things we didn't need, like the sleeping bag, the food, the water. We put all of that at our bedside for the next morning. And then Hayden and I kind of walked out, went around the area. We took some photos, took some videos, flew our drones, and took some time lapses. One of my favorite things here was the time lapses I shot. There's this one where I wish I kept it going for longer, but in this time lapse, the clouds are just coming up the mountain and it almost just looks like they're coming at you and covering it. And this was really awesome. And a technical aspect I want to share about these time lapses is that I was using a 1 second interval. So for the technical part of this, every time I'm shooting a time lapse, a lot of people ask me, what's my interval? What's a good interval? And it's always different depending on what you're shooting. But when I'm in the mountains, I notice that the clouds are extra fast compared to if you're just in the city or in the desert, like where clouds can move really slow. So I use a really, really fast interval, and I'm just taking a photo every single second for about 400 frames. And then when you see this video time lapse, I'm stitching all of those images together to get my final video. And what's awesome about this is that I actually get to edit this time lapse as individual photos in Camera Raw. So I'm really able to pull a lot of color out of these time lapses. Also, another thing I really liked about this was actually photographing the glacier. So this was just before sunset, the day before our climb. And when we put up the drones, we actually got to take photos of the crevasses and we got to see some of the route of our climb the next day. This was very cool on one hand, and on the other hand, it was terrifying because this was our first peak that we had done with glacier travel. So it's a whole other ball game from some other climbing we do. So the next morning we head out and I decided I wanted my bag as light as possible. Food is mandatory, water is mandatory, some safety gear is mandatory, and layers are mandatory because safety is paramount. That's the number one thing when you're doing something like this. And obviously I trained extra. I knew my bag was gonna be heavier than the average climber because of all my camera gear, but I actually opted to leave my tripod, which really bummed me out because I'm a huge time-lapse photographer, but I just couldn't justify the weight. And I actually only brought my Sony a7 III, which on one hand, it wasn't that great for video in the beginning because we were climbing up in the dark, and the R3 doesn't have as good of low light video as the regular 7 III, but I did know that the time lapses I took on the top, I was going to want them in 8K quality, which my R3 does, but my a7 III does not. So I decided to do that. Just to not confuse you, I didn't take my tripod, but talking about doing time lapses, I ended up at the summit of Cotopaxi for the few minutes we had. I set my camera on my backpack. I tried to level it and balance it to get a straight, time lapse of the landscape. As you can see, I didn't do a great job with that, and I didn't have that much time, so these are much shorter time lapses. I still got something. I didn't necessarily need the tripod. Also, as far as lenses go for the climb, I opted to only bring my 20mm 1.8 and my 85mm 1.8. And because of the time we had, the entire climb up and the entire climb down, I didn't have my 85mm on. I had it on for 2 minutes at the summit for a few photos, but otherwise 95% of the climb, my camera just had the 20mm on, which was awesome. It's a great lens, and you kind of want wide lenses for climbing shots and things like that, but still, it felt pretty limiting, if I'm being honest. So I want to tell you guys about a tool I use not only to sharpen my skills as a photographer, but also to grow my business, which obviously is PPA, the Professional Photographers of America. You guys have heard me talk about them a bunch in previous videos and on my Instagram and things like that. PPA is a nonprofit where I insure all of my camera gear. They cover up to $15,000 of all of my gear, but there's also a ton of other membership perks that come with being a member. For a super low monthly cost, you get game-changing resources like the equipment insurance I mentioned, data loss recovery services, and unparalleled education. One thing I haven't shared with you guys yet is the unbeatable marketing and sales tools. These resources are designed to increase your exposure, improve your sales process, and grow your understanding of marketing within the digital landscape. PPA marketing and sales tools include customizable brochures to showcase your work more easily to clients, downloadable price lists, ebooks created specifically for photographers with titles such as Successful Photography Sales and Marketing 101 for Photographers. There's also tutorials and videos that feature topics like business branding, content creation, and successful digital marketing tips. So gain some knowledge to help you reach more potential clients and join over 33,000 other photographers looking to grow their business and craft for just $27.92 a month. The link is down in my description for $25 off with my discount code, so check it out, and let's get back to the breakdown of how I photograph Cotopaxi. This shot I love because this is one of the steepest parts of the entire climb, right below the summit, and you were just above the clouds. I feel like this photo really captures the magnitude of the mountain we were climbing and the entire way down, and just to show that how high of an elevation we were at. You know, we are far beyond the clouds in this photo, and I'm just really happy with how this photo showcases that. This one I love because, similar to the last one, it really shows the magnitude of how out there and how high of altitude we are, but also this one is probably my favorite photo with the levels and layers of crevasses that you can see in the image, and the climbers just show the scale of the mountain versus the crevasses and just the size of the climb we had to tackle. So this photo right here is one of the few photos that was taken on my 85mm lens. To be honest, I'm not that happy with the colors in this, but I do like that you can see another volcano in the distance just emerging from the clouds. It's almost hard to distinguish the clouds in the sky versus the clouds around the volcano, and for that reason I really do like this photo. This photo is after we came past the steepest portion of the entire hike and climb, and you can actually see the summit in the top left corner of the photo. This is when the sun started to rise, you know, the night started transitioning into blue hour, and in this you can kind of see that the sun is slowly lighting up the landscapes around, but I also still like that you can see Hayden's headlamp on the ground in front of his ice axe. And this is kind of one of our first looks at, you know, daylight. We had been climbing at this point for 6 hours in the dark. This photo really shows the last few steps overcoming the steepest part of the climb, and it shows the clouds in the distance. The sun was starting to rise. There started to get some color in the sky. I'm not really happy with the quality of this photo. I think my ISO was like 6400, but the memory of this photo and how thankful I was to get past the steep part of the climb, I really like this. This is one of my favorite photos of the entire climb. Two people out in the distance are both wearing red jackets, making them really pop against the landscapes and all of the snow. To the right side of us was a huge drop. It was a relatively large cornice, and to the left it was just a huge sloping drop off. So I think this really showcases some of the exposure that we dealt with. You know, there was parts of this climb with drops kind of in every direction, and this I think really shows that. And I love that the people are silhouetted against the clouds, and I like that the snow serves as a very nice leading line out to them. So one of the most important things about this type of photography, you know, I do a huge mixture of landscape photography, travel photography, mountain photography, and as I dive deeper and get better at rock climbing and just kind of climbing in general, I do a lot more climbing photography. And this trip, I really wanted to focus on that. But one thing that comes with that is in the mountains, they're unpredictable. You know, I have climbed peaks, you know, Cotopaxi and other peaks in Colorado and things where I've been in 70-mile-an-hour winds. I've been caught in snowstorms, hailstorms, just rained on for hours hiking. And when you do that and you have your rain cover over your bag, you know, the rain cover only does so much. So my biggest worry for this is I really wanted a clear weather day, which for the most part we did get. The night before we had the hail on our hike up to the Refugio, but otherwise we actually had a really good weather day, which was awesome. My biggest worry is I was gonna go back with a broken camera, a broken lens, who knows what else. So thankfully the conditions were great, but typically I'm always prepared when climbing a mountain that I know my camera equipment is gonna take a beating, so I always have filters on. I always have the silicone lens covers in my pocket. So if things get really bad and, you know, I can unzip my jacket halfway, kind of stuff my camera in until I'm actually ready to take a shot. And another note why every single ounce of weight in my bag mattered is because, for those that don't know, when you're hiking at high altitude, your lungs, your oxygen, your brain, nothing works like it does normally. Like if you've ever heard of altitude sickness, it's a very real thing, and above 10,000 feet, things just get exponentially worse and worse and worse the higher you get. And before this trip, the highest I had been was 16,300. So this was a huge leap into the unknown for me. And when you're carrying a 10-pound bag, at that altitude, it feels like 80 pounds. And I think my bag actually was 30 to 40 pounds on the way up. And then I drank all 3 liters of water. So on the way down, maybe lost like 10 pounds of that, which is nice. Another huge component on the climb was having my Insta360. So this is pretty hands-off. When you have the Insta360, you can either control it from your smartphone or you just press the record button. All of the editing, keyframing, all that stuff, you do that in post-production. So that was really, really nice because I just cleared a memory card. I think I had like an hour available, and it shoots at like 5.2K footage, which obviously, you know, that's encompassing the whole 360 and allows for cropping in and things like that. But this was huge because I just put this on the selfie stick, and you know, I had my ice axe in one hand, and we were, you know, all roped together, and I just held the stick over my shoulder, acted like it wasn't even there. And I did this a few times, so every time we took a break and I knew we'd be taking a break like 10 minutes later, I would just let the camera roll. This brought some of my favorite shots, and they were really, really cool and unique. And I think it was some of my favorite footage on the mountain, because the biggest thing is that Insta360 also has amazing image stabilization. So that helped a lot, because a lot of the photos and footage, I was having a super hard time on the way down photographing and just taking videos, because we were so wiped out physically and mentally. And at that point, all that matters is getting down safely. But the sun was finally out, so all I wanted to do was take 1,000 photos. But there's this huge trade-off of safety comes first, but still wanting to document it and come out with great things. Let's talk about some of my favorite shots, settings where they're shot at. So what would I have changed if there was anything I could have changed? I probably would have taken a 1635 or a 2470. My 2470 is f4, it's a Zeiss lens, which is great, but it's just not like the 2.8 or the prime lenses. My ideal lens for this probably would have been a 2470 2.8 G Master, just because I think that would give me the most versatility. You know, I'd get some wide landscape. I would also get some nice kind of telephoto zoom lens of the mountains. And if I had that, I probably wouldn't have brought any other lenses, because I think that would have been perfect. And otherwise, I don't think I would have changed much. It wouldn't be realistic to take a stabilizer up there. I think the Insta360 was great. Really, there's not much I would change other than maybe the lens change. But anyways, this is the experience of a lifetime, and thank you so much to PPA for believing in me and supporting my work and everything. They mean the world to me, and obviously for what I do and what I photograph, like having camera insurance is like, there's no question, and not to mention all of the other amazing things membership with PPA offers. So they're awesome, check them out. And if you need camera insurance, you need to insure your gear, or you want any of the other perks that come with it, check out the description below to get $25 off your membership. But yeah, if you have any more questions about how I photographed this, how I documented this entire trip and climb, leave them in the comments. Would love to help out or let you know anything that I may have missed. But thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you later.